Here we are, my friends. We're back with another live show. I'm Gary. Even though it doesn't say it, that's Dylan. We'll make sure it says that once we get up and rolling here. And lots of fun stuff over the last week. The market is still moving hot, Dylan. I know you've had some personal experiences with that. And one of the main topics we're going to cover today is every year the Toronto Real Estate Board, or I should say the Toronto Regional Real Estate Board, Dylan, puts out the market review and market outlook. And I love this review. Like, it's a 100-page document, but I love researching. You know that. I've been, I guess, researching and coaching and teaching from it for the last 7 or 8 years since it's been out, Dylan. But how you doing, my man?
I'm doing great. And I share your excitement for reading a report like that, because as we talked about how we started this, both you and I love looking into the stats and seeing what's going on in the market. Like our broker owner, Colin, always says, the numbers tell the story. So it's important for us to take advantage of that. They're releasing this huge document for us. We better be reading it.
Well, and that's just it, right? What can you take and stand out from the crowd? And you don't have to memorize all of this. Trust me, I don't. But you might read something in this report or insight, or watch this video, have a question and so forth. And all of a sudden you retain that information, relay it to your clients, and maybe it helps them, or it should be helping them make decisions. And that's what a report does, right? It helps us make decisions, and maybe the key word is educated decisions,
Yeah, exactly. And it gives us a picture of what's to come, right? Like, everybody keeps asking, where's this market going to go? So let's start at the very basis with the report, see what they're saying, and then come back to us. Like we said last time, we're in the trenches. We see it before anybody else sees it. So we can share our excitement of seeing a whole bunch of new listings hit the market last week that no report can show you that, right? We know that. We can see the buyer cards showing up from buyer agent showings. We know how many people are coming to look at a house. I can tell you I had 51 showings in 5 days at my listing last week. Like, we know that. That's not in a report somewhere. So it's
Yeah.
great to combine the two together.
Yeah, and this report is not only done by Toronto Real Estate Board, but it's the information and research is done not with TRREB and with PricewaterhouseCoopers, and there's a tremendous amount of information and research that goes into things like this. And I know when I started, taking notice of it 6 or 7 years ago, like I said, I would share this at the investment workshops that I used to host, and those are the ones that people remember, because we were sharing, like, not only factual information, but information that's going to help them make a decision on not only where they're investing, how they're investing, what the market is trending towards, and so forth. So this is good stuff. So Dylan, talk to us a little bit about, you just kind of opened up the can there, or the door, on something I want to dive into. You had how many showings on your listing last week?
Yeah, 51 showings in under a week. And I know I was telling you before the call started, and why I really want to dig into this is, you know, all realtors and buyers right now can share the idea of buyer fatigue, the amount of homes that unfortunately buyers have to, try to bid on before they get the one for them. And it's a rough roller coaster, right? Like, first, when you're picking out a home, you got to fall in love with it. You got to picture yourself in it. And then you go in on offer night and there's 5, 7, 18 other offers. And now, despite you having the budget and the ability to purchase that home, now it's a competition. The guy that puts down the most wins. And then you feel that heartbreak, right? And then you have to do it again, fall in love with another home and hope that it's the one for you. And so I just want people to know that we, as agents, we've understood buyer fatigue for a long time now. But what I'm seeing just more recently come up is buyer agent fatigue, where I had realtors calling me last week, talking themselves out of even coming to see the property, let alone talking themselves out of giving me an offer. They're like, oh, you're going to sell for too much. Like, we don't even want to give it a try. We're going to go look elsewhere. And I'm like, you called me because you thought it was the right fit for your client, but you don't want to put in the effort to come show it to them because you're worried about them being let down again. And it's just such a funny thing because, Gary, I mean, as you know, in this market, it's tough to predict. You can't predict extremes. That's why you see one house that sells at a number and you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. And then you see a house that's same condition or maybe even superior sometimes doesn't have the same results. And you're like, well, how does that make sense? Well, the market unfortunately doesn't make sense. And so if you're not willing if you're not willing to give it a try every time, you're missing out on an opportunity for yourself,
Yeah, and
right?
that's interesting. We as buying agents, when we're in that role, you know, sometimes we say the no for our clients way too fast,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? And what I've learned, and it was something actually that Michelle, my wife, taught me: don't say someone's no for them.
Yes.
Don't like,
Yeah.
who are you to say no for somebody, right?
Yeah. And on both sides of the equation there, right? The buyer agent is now saying no for their buyer to not bring them. They're also saying no on behalf of my seller that we wouldn't work with their offer, right? And there's two properties kind of in particular last week that I look at. Like there's the one staggering sale that happened, and I think that's why a lot of people got scared off. They're like, that sale, doesn't make sense. That was a way too big of a leap between the previous sale. So now I'm nervous that every home is going to sell at that price. Well, then a following sale happened that was they sold for the exact same amount, but it was a much superior property. It had more square footage, like 500 square feet difference. And Gary, as you know, when we look at pricing brackets, 500 square feet, that's usually where big jumps happen.
Yeah.
The big jump between a 1,700 square foot townhome to a 2,200 square foot detached to a 2,700 square foot detached. There's massive jumps in all those price categories. And these guys ended up selling for the same. And so I think what happened there was the buyer agent that was willing to go and make it happen for their client, they got a good deal. The other guys that talked themselves out of it, they didn't get a good deal.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's
I don't
it's
know.
it's interesting. Like, you're right. We can't. The market is what it is, and that's such a cop out. But I know you, and many others, when the buyer says, like, how much should we offer, or the seller says, how much can we expect? We don't know. I know last week I had some clients that wanted to go see a property, and just when here's what I love doing, especially if it's in an area where there's not, it's not in a subdivision, it's in a rural area. So I just drew a big map and I pulled all the sales within the last 2 months, just to kind of give a variation and some data into it. And wouldn't you know it, average sale price was 110%.
Yep.
So when we get information like that, Dylan, we got to share that with our buyers, because now it allows them to set their expectation when they see a price come out. And it's not a true science by any means, by any means.
It gives you a guideline to work with.
Yeah,
What's
and I know we talked about this last week too, but it does give us a guideline to work with, and until you kind of get into the property and see the property, and then you will allow yourself, no, that's not for me, or yeah, I don't mind spending a little bit extra for this property than perhaps I was thinking I was going to, because a number of different factors. You're going to be there for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And over time, it doesn't matter what that price might be today, for instance. So yeah, interesting buyer fatigue from the agent's perspective.
Yeah, that
That's
was the first time that I'd really seen that popping up so prevalently, where buyer agents were talking themselves on and coming to see the property. And for our seller side, I can happily share that we sold for over $250,000 more than the last sale on the street that was 60 days ago. Right.
wow.
So,
Yeah.
and that being said, there's still buyer agents that could have taken opportunity on ours that did miss out. I know the number sounds extreme, but there's still opportunity there. And then I think the way we need to cap this off, Gary, is what we're seeing in the market right now is we saw a lot of new listings come out last week. I think we're finally at that point where it's a little bit seasonal, but we're seeing more inventory come. The rates held again last week, but there's still the talk. We know that that's going to come back around March, April. We're going to be looking at that. And I think that when that happens, sellers at this point are realizing, look, I've made my money. The housing market has gone up a lot. That hasn't gone away. I've still got that. What if I'm going to make that move up? Why don't I do it now while I can still get a better rate instead of doing it later and then paying more on my mortgage in the long run? Anyway, I've already seen the gains that can get me to the next step. Take advantage of it now. And I'm hoping that this little bit of inventory is going to continue going. And for the sellers that are on the sidelines right now, I'd say, like, now's your chance. Don't feel like, oh, well, I'm not the only one on the street, so I'm not going to get that wow sale anymore. Because that's really when we saw it. When there was one available,
Yeah.
18 people showed up and somebody did something crazy. But it's not about that. That crazy person has already set a new benchmark for your neighborhood. Now you can go out into the market and hopefully buy and sell a little bit more comfortably, right? Because like everybody says, I sell my home, but where do I go? Well, now we can all come on the market. We've got a little bit more inventory and there's a place to go, which is what's important.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And you buy, typically you're buying and selling in the same market, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Exactly.
and you might be one of 5 homes instead of one of one now, but still that means you get to go hopefully purchase. You might have a more selection to purchase from, so that you're always kind of working together there. Typically, not always, but typically. Okay, cool stuff.
Tell us
I
a little
love.
bit about this report.
Yeah, well, you know what I love about that experience is it's relevant, it's now, it's happening, it's something that you just finished like in the last day or two, right? Like that,
Yep.
and that's what these live streams are all about. Yeah, we can come up here and talk theory and stats and everything else, but you know, boots on the ground type thing, and your own client's experience, whether it's on the buy or sell side, like that's what I think our viewers are craving for, and just to kind of get, okay, oh, someone else is experiencing the same thing I just experienced. I'm not the only one, right? And that's important.
Yeah. And we've got great stuff that, we're reading in articles right now. Like I got a great stat that I want to share from TerraNet. Like you mentioned, they're part of the report that we're going to be looking at. But that stuff isn't the story of like that. You can read that in the newspaper, but what we're sharing in our day to day is what you can't get access to in the news. So
That's right. Yeah.
let's share it. Let's share it and talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so this report, we're going to make the downloads available where you can download the executive summary, which is, I have it right here. It's an executive summary is 28 pages, so it's all good, but it's all good. And the deep dive report is typically about 100 pages. I haven't seen the link for that yet, and I like getting my hands on that to just kind of circle back, get some of the information on. But this is for Toronto Real Estate Board, which we know represented over 120,000 transactions last year, Dylan, and of course record sales everywhere. I mean, that's no news to anybody, and that's what it talks about and things like that. But Dylan, one of the things that I overlooked or didn't even think about looking, and I threw this number to you just prior to going live. You're like, oh yeah, that does make sense. The number that I want to share with everybody today, not only did we have a record high in sales for transactions, we also had a record high of 55,000 rental transactions this past year. Like that number just blows me away. So there are, not only are people looking to purchase and sell homes, but people are looking to get into homes, Dylan.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what I love about hearing when the numbers tell the story of what I'm seeing in my business and what I'm seeing with my clients, it just makes me so excited because it makes sense now, right? Like I'm like, am I just seeing that? Am I making up what I'm seeing? No, the numbers actually do tell the story. So the fact that the rental numbers were so high, and then TerraNet released a stat saying that people that already own one property made up 25% of the buyers last year. So that's people taking the equity from their home. They've been tired of saying, I've talked about this a couple of times. They're tired of saying, okay, I would move, but I don't know where to go. But I've got all this equity in my home. What do I do with it? Well, great time to build some wealth through buying an investment property. And that's why we've seen areas like Barrie blow up in price and sales. Yeah. And now to hear the stat, how many rentals were done last year? Well, it makes sense because it's not end users that are buying a lot of these homes. At least not 25% of them aren't. But that's the bump in the rental units.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And there's such a demand, and I'm gonna share with you about 3 different I don't know if major stats or that storylines. That's a good word for it. Storylines out of the report, and we're not going to dive into any of them really, really deep today. That'll happen over the next several streams here. But people are still moving to the area, and one of them actually talks about immigration to the area. And there's 2 things here too, because we always think of immigration of people coming to Canada, coming to the GTA, but there's also something called net migration. And net migration is people within the province or provinces moving to another area. So maybe my job is taking me from Hamilton to Toronto to Barrie to what have you. And we see that too, where that often doesn't get talked about. And that's happening a lot too. And of course, we're going to talk about what does it mean in the new scope of our employment, and what does that look like from, remote working to coming and going from that perspective. So all good stuff, Dylan, all good stuff. Okay, I'm gonna share a slide here, and here's what we got. So the first one, speaking of that, is back to office, and let me read this, and Dylan and I will kind of chat about it a little bit. And this is again from the TRREB market trends report. As we continue to grapple with COVID-19 pandemic, real estate needs and work patterns are shifting in response. We know that employment patterns have transformed for a lot of employers, particularly those who worked in an office environment pre-pandemic. New research published by TRREB and Toronto Region Board of Trade suggests a new normal involves a hybrid approach. Many workers will spend some of their time working from home and in some time in a more traditional setting. Both business executives and workers seem to be largely aligned for the need for a hybrid and flexible post-COVID working arrangement. So a lot of stuff coming out there. Basically, they're saying what we already know. People enjoy working from home. Mm-hmm. They've kind of figured out how to work from home, and that means, Dylan, you know as well as anybody, our homes need to adapt as well.
Yeah. You know what the biggest one for that was the gap between 3-bedroom homes and 4-bedroom homes when this pandemic started, how big that got, how quickly it got. Whereas before, traditionally, and been doing this since 2007, so the gap did change over time, but where if all things being equal, the difference between the bedroom might have been $30,000 or $40,000 tops, pre-pandemic, when you were looking at the difference an additional bedroom would made from 3 to 4, right? But now when everybody needed a home office and more places to work, we were seeing 4 bedrooms sell $200,000 more than their counterpart at the 3-bedroom of a similar sized home, right? And even if you look at it today, you're still seeing massive gaps between the 3-bedroom and 4-bedroom homes. And it's because of the need to be able to work from home, that extra space that we're getting. And that was one of the first things, like, as we talk, I'd say the first thing we saw, Gary, when we realized that what the pandemic was doing to buyer, activity and behaviors in the market, was we were seeing the spread, right? People were finally able to move further away from the core because they didn't need to worry about their commute time. And then number 2 right away that I saw was the need for the 4th bedroom.
Yeah, that exactly. And the need for it, but also how do you create an office space? So we're, as many of us have done, and I know you did, and I did, not to the extent that you did, with home renovations, right, over the last year or 2 years, creating, whether it's another workspace in your house, another, a place to, get fitness and things like that, and gyms and so forth, like all of that blew up, which meant we were spending money in our local hardware stores. But we were also, think about this too, Dylan, we were increasing the value of our homes that we currently own. Yeah. Right? Like it's kind of a twofold thing. And the other thing too, over the holidays, actually we were at our neighbor's house, and there was a headhunter there. So I started talking to him, and he said, I haven't been this busy since like the early 2000s. Mm-hmm. So, because what we're seeing is, and I've heard about it too, and in a sense I was part of it, like the great resignation of like 2021, 22, right? People are not only resigning from their current positions, but they're actually seeking out employers who have embraced, the remote working environment. And that creates a whole shift in the market as well. Like, I'm talking real estate market, that creates an entire shift of not only how you commute to work, but how, what real estate values are doing in areas like you mentioned, like up in Barrie and Innisfil, where I just sold recently, and some of those outlier areas, right?
Mm-hmm. The interesting thing there is it's brought a more equilibrium between market areas. Like, there used to be bigger gap every 20 minutes you went away from the core, but now that's just not the case because a lot of them are working from home anyway. So that 20 minutes doesn't make the difference. Is that house the same size as the house that I was going to buy 20 minutes south of here? That's all that matters. I'll pay the same amount because that drive is no longer a concern for me. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. I remember the first time going, a little bit further north again after the pandemic started. And I was like, oh yeah, money goes very far up here. You can buy whatever you want. And then I was looking at the recent sales and I was like, okay, take that back. That's no longer the case, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Good stuff. Okay, let's look at the next one here. Let's look at buyer intentions. Buyer intentions, sustained job creation and acceleration in immigration will keep demand for home ownership strong in 2022. However, the impact of Omicron notwithstanding, higher borrowing costs are also expected this year, which will prompt some would-be home buyers on the margin of affordability to put their decision to purchase on hold. We are expecting, this is the big one, Dylan, another 110,000 home sales in 2022. Yes, it's down from 2021, which, as we know, was 120, but we're still going to be, that might be, if memory serves me correctly, still like the third highest ever.
Yeah. Yeah. It's going to be very interesting to see if, I guess, first, if we hold that, that's the expectation. But I'm really looking forward to the full report where we can dive a little bit deeper in how they're coming up with the 110, because like the demand that we're seeing, I totally understand the start of this where they're talking about, there is going to be a certain amount of the buying population that is just going to have to put this purchase on hold because we've seen ourselves get priced down on the market, particularly, our first time home buyers, right? That's a big challenge. But with the backlog and buyers still there, I mean, we're not far off. With 110, we're still not far off from what the record was, but we very well could still see a big push in sales. And 110, can't even believe I'm saying it, 110 is a massive push in sales. So if we see that again this year, I mean, that just goes to speak to, they've acknowledged what the backup in buyer demand is as well.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting.
2021 wasn't an anomaly.
No, it's not. We're gonna still, and I think that's going to be the wheelhouse going forward, is always over 100,000. And, the last few sales I worked on, the buyers actually were not coming to the table in getting financing. They were buying with cash. They had already owned something, generated equity, and they were closing on with cash. They weren't getting a mortgage. So, yeah, and it talked about the affordability and the interest rates coming up a little bit. And yes, it hasn't happened to date, but it will happen. We know that. The affordability, I believe, is still going to remain incredibly strong. So, for instance, if you've been in your home for over 5 years, but most are 10 to 12, right?
Yep.
Arguably, most of those people in the GTA will have, and I know everywhere is a little bit different, but in the GTA, you probably have $1 million of equity there or abouts, right? If you purchased 12 years ago, 10 plus years ago.
Yep.
You have that thereabouts. And if you're buying somewhere, if you're going from $1 million home or a $1.4 million home to $2 million home, well, you got to come up with, $600,000-$800,000, for instance. For some, that's not a lot to ask to put a mortgage on a property, right? If you're moving all that equity, I know these are crazy numbers and big numbers, but we're talking in the GTA where most households are 2-income households making, what did we say last? I think we said it last call, well over 200. Most of them are over 300,000, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's big numbers, but that's kind of where the GTA has trended recently, right? And when people keep asking, where are people coming with this money? Well, it's cheap money to get. They've got a lot of equity in their homes, and incomes for a lot of people are in that range now. We're comfortably over the 200 for some of the main pockets that we're looking at, right?
Yeah. And I just got the what do you call it? The information right in front of me here, Dylan. That's the executive summary. And yep. Yeah, we've seen other areas have bigger jumps, and it's saying in here, Toronto had one, had a big jump, but areas like Durham and York region had, some of the biggest jumps ever. And we can, of course, we trade mostly in York region, and there's areas even within the region that had bigger jumps than some of the other areas. And, I'm still working with a lot of buyers, and I know you are, so it's not like it's slowing down from, where are my buyers coming from, right? We're still working hard to find properties for them.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's the exciting thing that we talked about at the start of this call. Like, we're seeing more inventory come on now. I think we just need to keep encouraging those sellers, like, guys, now's the time. As you see this inventory increase, don't worry about being the only one on the street, because those benchmarks have already been set for you. You want to be making the moves in this more. It's not balanced yet, but as we trend to more listings, like, that's the good time to be making moves. I think we're gonna have a strong spring market. Going to be a lot of opportunity there for people. Just keep moving forward in that sense.
Yeah. And the other thing here that we'll end off on this point too, I'm just reading here, Toronto and Durham region, and this should not be a surprise for us from the Toronto perspective, led in the pre-construction sales. Mm-hmm. Well, of course, because Toronto has that's where most of the that's where most of the towers are being built from the condo perspective. Yeah. And then of course in Durham. So don't let that information kind of skew what's going on, because that's not really based on last year's information. That's based on previous years where developers, got the go ahead to develop and so forth. And some of the other regions don't have the same movement of development as, of course, Toronto does. But I'm somewhat curious to know that Durham region actually led Peel in that area, because Peel is in most areas, Peel would be one of the largest cities in that state or province, right? Like it's a big populous area. Good. Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, on the note of Peel, for our next call, I want to talk more about Metrolinx just selling off a big chunk of their land to a developer and not leaving any clauses in there for affordable housing, and what a missed opportunity that was. But that's a whole other conversation that I think we should have a little bit more, because we're talking about this market and what are we doing to make changes. And the policy changes with like interest rates or taxing people on the equity in their homes. Like, I don't think any of that stuff is what we need to see. We need to see the government allowing for more affordable housing, opening up more land to develop, making development a little bit easier, cutting through some of the red tape. And when it's their time to shine, they've squandered a few of those opportunities. So I don't like the idea of taxing homeowners on their principal residence for the equity coming up, putting a capital. I don't like that when you're not even trying with this publicly owned land that you're selling to a developer and not mandating, affordable housing. Like, if our government can't even do that, that's where we need to start.
Yeah.
So that's the big thing that could have helped so many people in Peel. And even the mayor over there came out and said, like, look, you guys kind of really screwed us here. This was a big opportunity. We have in our city in particular, we have a big need for this. Like, how did you let this one fall through? But anyways, we'll save that for another time. I just love that you brought it up, and I'm like, that needs to be addressed as well.
I think that's golden. And to circle back on that, in Stouffville over the last several weeks, the mayor, the council and a community group is really pushing for developers to create that here in this area too. And of course, there's going to be an election coming up in the next several months of a lot of these towns and areas where that's going to be a major platform for a lot of campaigns. I know it will be. And I think we're going to talk much more about this, but if you see anything come out at the government level around the real estate housing and what we can do to increase housing, I would ask this question, Dylan. Whatever announcement that they make or they position to make, ask yourself this question: how is that going to create more housing? Because that's what we need.
That's what we need.
Yeah.
Go on.
No, I was going to say more supply, more housing, same word. And that will not only bring prices down a little bit or slow prices down, but as you mentioned there too earlier, is the affordable housing. And I don't care what it is, even if it's something that you and I both stand firmly against, and that's taxing personal residents. Will that create more housing? No, it won't. It won't. No, anyways,
it's just another way for the government to get back some of the money that they've been spending.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And every time we got to acknowledge, every time they put in something, they say it's temporary, it always stays. It's that new revenue stream. They'll never give it up because they can't, right? So
yeah. Once you have, that's right. Once you have a revenue stream, you don't want to give it up. Okay, last one here, and we're going to talk about first-time home buyers. Yeah, I think they got hit the hardest over the last 2 years, we'll call it, and let's see what they're saying here. According to an Ipsos polling, overall first-time homebuyer intentions have dipped in 2022. However, when we drill when we drill a bit deeper, we find that the dip was driven by lower intentions in suburban regions surrounding the city of Toronto. In the 416 area code, polling suggests first-time homebuyer activity could actually increase compared to last year. This likely follows a resurgence in condominium apartment demand experienced in 2021.
2022 is the year of the condo.
Yeah.
That's it. We're going to see that market bump back up. I think we talked a little bit about this last week. Like as we see market segments increase, the ones below it got to catch up, and there's that big gap right now from how the detached housing market has led the way so much because that's our new buyer behavior. That's what we're looking for, and now the townhomes are catching up to that. They've already done so quite nicely, and we'll see the condos do the same. I think one of the biggest slowdowns we saw, right when the pandemic hit, was nobody wanted to be locked down in their 600 square foot condo and not be able to go outdoors. Everybody's clamoring into the same elevator. Like that market got hit for a good reason. And I think now as we've moved along that we're not seeing that same kind of, I guess, hesitancy about it. And it's also the most affordable place to purchase right now.
Yeah, I just clipped this literally right from the article as you're talking about
Beautiful.
it. And you said,
look.
you like, look at this in the 416 first-time home buyers, they led the pace there. They were almost half of the purchases, and that's just based on, and we talked about it, pre-construction and the condo market being that entry level. And of course, we're going to see more of that in the 416 or the Toronto area than anywhere else. I always find this graph really, really interesting. You can see the 905 there is probably, I think, the least amount, right? For first-time home buyers. Yeah, and that's
makes sense, right?
Exactly. Yeah. From the pricing, how it's increased over the last couple of years. Right. And again, that gets back to some of these areas like Peel, Mississauga, York region, so forth, not having enough affordable housing. And that's going to, that's proof in the pudding in a sense. Right.
This is a great one. I'd love to go back to the report from a few years ago and see what it was like pre-pandemic, see what those numbers look like a little bit as a comparison. It's so funny now how you can't just rely on the last couple of years because we've been in this a couple of years now. We have to look at what some of the pre-pandemic trends were, and it's just for curiosity because we're not going back to that necessarily. But it's always important to know where we came from and what did it look like before this.
Yeah. And there's some other graphs in here that perhaps I'll put in for next week, Dylan. But, we're not going to talk so much about the pricing because we all know about the pricing, but I think it's the demand in the different areas. That's the interesting piece here because pricing, we've talked that to death or you've heard it everywhere else, right?
And by the time we say it, it's already obsolete.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just changed again.
Exactly. I'm going to throw another one up here if that's okay, because we talked about it very briefly, and let's see if I can do this. So I'm going to do this, and I'm just going to
focus on that there for a second, and I'll say, like in the note of pricing for everyone, for if you're watching this show and you would like to know what the trends are in your area, your neighborhood, let us know and we'll bring that to the next episode so you can get those answers because we love looking into those snapshots. It just doesn't make sense for us to pull them up arbitrarily necessarily. So let us know what you're looking for and we'll definitely check it out and make a point of putting it into our segment next show.
Absolutely. Great call. Okay. We'll kind of somewhat end on this. And we talked about immigration earlier, Dylan. Increased immigration obviously is a key driver in any market, any time of year. And you can see what's happening here in the GTA area. Immigration is stepping up again, which is going to put a demand on the housing supply, right? It's actually incredible of what it's going to be doing here locally. There's cities out there that have I forget the scientific term on it, or the social, where you have a minus net migration. People are leaving and not coming back. Where Toronto has, quite frankly, as long I've lived here my entire life, I never remember the population of Toronto going down. Maybe I'm wrong, but yeah.
Well, I think that's funny because it comes up when pricing goes up like this. That becomes the concern. Like, is it going to be a city that people can no longer afford to live in, where people just commute into? And with the amount of wealth and jobs and business creation, we're not anywhere close to that. That's why we're still seeing so many people come here, so many people still buying here. Like that's still, the reality of Toronto at this moment is on the international scale. We're still pretty young and we've got a long way to go.
Yeah, there. One of the organizations I used to be a part of from an investment standpoint, that comment would come up a lot, and they would bring up the top cities in the world where there's still a massive, migration happening, economic foundation. Of course, those were cities like, Hong Kong to London to Paris to New York to LA and everywhere else, and we were still by far the cheapest
exactly
to live, right?
Thing, right? Yeah.
And those cities keep growing and growing and growing. So anyways, we did a lot today. We did a lot, lots of stuff going through. We'll post the links to where you can get this executive summary. And, if you're into it, dig into it. Or if you got, as Dylan said earlier, a question about not only your local market, but perhaps, the market in general, or what our thoughts are based on, different things coming out of the news, we're happy to share with you, our insights. And more importantly, as Dylan kind of started off here with his boots to the ground story of what's happening with sellers and buyers at the moment, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Gary, I love this weekly call that we're doing. Let's keep going. And for you guys that are watching, thank you so much for taking it in. And we want to hear from you. We want to know what you guys are seeing and your opinions, right? Like, we've got these reports that are telling us what buyers are thinking. I want to hear from the real people. Like, what's your real experience right now? You know what I mean? Because we're lucky enough in our profession that we do get invited into a lot of people's homes, and we get to hear their challenges and what they're working on. And, that's our passion, right? So we want to see more of that.
Beautiful.
Absolutely.
Beautiful. I love it. Okay, my friend, that wraps up another great show, and we'll see everybody next Friday at 1:00, and have an amazing, amazing weekend, everybody. We'll see you next week. Bye for now.
See you next week, guys.